The following is a comment someone made about the Sonic manga, Sonic and the Blade of Courage, when comparing it to IDW Sonic. Quote, "The manga is doing in one chapter what the comic has completely failed to do in 80 issues over 5 years. What every single Sonic comic has completely failed to do over the last 30 effing years of the bastardizations they've committed. Imagine a sequential art Sonic adaptation that actually features Sonic the Hedgehog doing what Sonic the Hedgehog actually does. Going on adventures, going to new places and seeing new things, meeting and helping new friends, having fun, doing it all just because he can, because he wants to. It is so effing refreshing to read a Sonic the Hedgehog comic. Getting one that reads from right to left was all it took. Who'd have thunk it?" I honestly don't know how anyone can deny that the only conceivable way you would or could ever be a fan of the IDW Sonic comics is because you effing hate Sonic at this point, when the Sonic manga is here and actually effing features Sonic the Hedgehog and not that imposter wearing Sonic skin. Sonic is here in this manga. If you're still reading and enjoying that comic, it's because you hate Sonic. That's all there is to it. This is only one of the many unhinged rants, video essays, and or conversations I've seen or had where someone says that IDW Sonic is one of the worst things that the franchise has ever produced. Different people are more or less insane about this, but the number of people who are just completely unreasonable about the comic is kind of staggering. As one of the seemingly few people who really enjoys the IDW comics, I can't help but wonder where all of this criticism even comes from. So I decided to go ahead and look up some people talking about the comic to talk about their criticisms and where I agree and disagree with it. I want to start with one of the sillier bits of quote-unquote drama that surrounds this topic. A little while back there was a bit of a Twitter tuff when one of the members of the IDW staff, Gigi, responded to a post of an old IDW Sonic panel saying that they loved the more insecure portrayal of Sonic in that arc, talking about how it made him more relatable and whatnot. In response, a bunch of Sonic understanders logged on and tried to dunk on them. Essentially, the argument was that Sonic doesn't have insecurities or demons to fight. He's already perfect and he doesn't need to learn anything. This is actually a somewhat common view of the character, and it's a big point made by some YouTubers when talking about Sonic. Here's an example from one of Big Drip Mike's videos on the topic. The video will be linked in the description. You can check that out if you want to.
Sonic the Hedgehog is a youthful adventurer who is the embodiment of that free spirit in the wind. Now I want to point out that Sonic is not a traditional superhero. I mean, yeah, he has heroic traits, no doubt, but according to his early description of his characterization, he himself don't see himself as a hero. He doesn't fight for truth or justice or whatever. He's simply an adventurer with a heart of gold, with courage and self-confidence. In the cutscene of Sonic 06, where Elise was worrying about the flames of disaster, he just grabs her hand, forcing Elise to start running with him. That alone is perfect in terms of Sonic's character, because he's basically telling Elise to keep moving forward when things seem bleak, being a symbol of that unbreakable spirit in his heart of gold, inspiring someone else who was going through something, like he did with Blaze and Sonic Rush, or like he did with Tails when they first met, when he was struggling with his self-confidence. Sonic's inspiring nature bounces off of people that he meets, with Tails, with Amy, with Knuckles, with Shadow. All of his friends and allies changed their outlook because of Sonic's actions, him being a role model through his actions.
So, to summarize his points, he thinks that Sonic is too much of a typical superhero nowadays and that he doesn't have these sorts of doubts, because that's just not the character he is. In his eyes, portraying Sonic this way is, in effect, bad characterization. He also talks a lot about Sonic being an inspiring character and not a relatable character, so trying to give him these moments of weakness is missing the point. Now, there's a lot to be said here about how to write good characters, and as an aspiring writer myself, I have a lot of thoughts about this. For one, I do want to say that I think the idea of a character being relatable, being put on such a pedestal, can be dangerous. Characters and stories can be relatable without being good. Focusing too much on making something relatable can actually be a detriment in many cases. I think it's more important to make characters compelling in some way. There are a lot of ways to make a character compelling, but one of the most important in my experience is to make them have to learn something, challenge them, force them to grow. This is maybe the most common approach as well. In fact, this is the backbone of most forms of storytelling we're familiar with. The archetypical comedy has a character who kind of sucks growing into a better person, and the archetypical tragedy has a good hero with a tragic flaw that becomes their undoing, for example. This is the tradition of storytelling that this panel in the Metal Virus saga is drawing from, and I think it works really well here, especially if we consider all of the context that leads up to it. Earlier in the story, Sonic decides to spare Eggman, or Mr. Tinker at the time, and let Metal Sonic go free, and the consequences of both of those actions lead to the Metal Virus happening. After being exhausted both mentally and physically for days, nearly weeks on end, doubts start to creep into his mind. He's having to look back onto his past decisions and wonder if he did the right thing, and being forced to contend with those past actions is making him rethink his current ones. It's very earned drama, and seeing Sonic struggle to make it through this terrible situation and hold on to that hope that defines him as a character is really compelling. I speculate that the counter argument to all of this is, well, in previous stories like Unleashed, Sonic didn't have to overcome his own demons, so this is all out of character. This argument kinda just sucks in my mind. For one thing, the story of Sonic Unleashed was not good. Yeah, I said it, sue me. Sonic should have struggled against the Werehog form more. It would have made for a more compelling story to see him at least be tested by his circumstances instead of seemingly being unaffected by them. Pulling from a point in the video I mentioned earlier, that's what makes him overcoming the cyber corruption in Frontiers so inspiring. There, Sonic never gives up. He keeps fighting with a smile on his face, but you can still feel the pain he's going through. You can tell that the circumstances are getting to him, but he's persevering anyway. You could argue that Sonic is only supposed to inspire you, so seeing him doubt himself isn't necessary or the point of his character, but honestly, I don't see what's so inspiring about someone who's never affected by their circumstances triumphing. A weightlifter lifting 200 pounds easily is less inspiring than someone struggling to do a 100-pound deadlift for the first time. Sonic can be an inspiring character, that's fine, but I'm not going to be inspired by a guy who never doubts himself, never feels pain, never even flinches at his circumstances, pushing through to reach the end. This is why I think the Metal Virus and Frontiers are so much more inspiring than Unleashed is, because Sonic's pain feels real. This is why I prefer Sonic to be able to doubt himself. Yes, Sonic is a very confident person. He's very sure of who he is and what he wants to do. But even the most confident and self-actualized people can still doubt themselves from time to time. Sonic certainly shouldn't be acting like this all of the time. I don't think he should be written like an anxious teenager who can't even ask a girl out or whatever else people consider relatable nowadays. But him having doubts sometimes isn't taking away from his character. It's making him a person. That's the thing that rubs me the wrong way about a lot of these comics. The way a lot of people talk about Sonic, he sounds less like a real character to them and more like a Mary Sue. I've long since thought that Sonic is the least interesting part of a lot of the games he's a part of, because he's only ever a guide for another character to actually grow and change. And if that is the case, if we still need a character who is vulnerable, who Sonic can teach to grow as a person in order to make the stories work, what's so wrong with making Sonic a bit more nuanced and giving him some of that vulnerability? This is where I'm going to take a step away from direct criticism of the comics and talk more about something that's more broad. I think we should discuss the idea of a character being out of character, because it's something that comes up a lot in these discussions. This particular criticism gets applied to the IDW comics a lot. People saying that the cast is completely out of character. I'm gonna have to be brutally honest with you guys, but anytime you say this, you look completely insane to outsiders. Most people would look at how the Sonic cast acts in the games and then at them in the comics and say, well, they all look pretty similar to me, and come to the immediate conclusion that anyone who makes this criticism is completely full of it. The simple fact of the matter is that the comics and the games portray the characters close enough to each other that the average person and even the average Sonic fan wouldn't notice the difference. However, as we just discussed, it's not like there are no differences between how the cast is treated in the games and in the comic. Some of the games do have Sonic be this more infallible character, and the comic turns up a bit of his vulnerability at points. They are, in reality, extremely similar, but you can point to some distinctions between them if you look close enough. The thing we need to discuss here isn't just if the characters are different or not, or to what degree. I mean, we do need to talk about that, but that's not the only thing we need to talk about. We also need to discuss what kind of and amount of differences constitute someone being out of character in the first place. I think some people will argue that any and all differences at all are too much, but that's clearly wrong. I mean, here's one small example. Sonic Adventure 2 features, I think, the first time that Eggman and Sonic come to a bit of an understanding and aren't at each other's throats in canon. This is a big departure from how they previously interacted, and the person credited for writing this game, Shiro Mikawa, I hope I pronounced that correctly, did not write any of the previous games, at least as far as I could find. He started writing for future games, though. This is a change in how Sonic and Eggman see each other by a new writer, but I don't think anyone would say that either of them are out of character here because it feels like a natural development from their previous characters. The scenario justifies the change in characterization, so no one really thinks that it's an issue. And since then, people have accepted Sonic and Eggman putting aside their differences to work together in the right scenario. Of course, that doesn't mean that you can just do anything with the character and it's okay. I think a good example of a member of the Sonic cast being out of character is Sonic Prime and its take on the titular blue blur. Sonic in this show has always felt off to me, and I couldn't describe why at first, but I've come to realize that I think the problem is that he doesn't have the same confidence that he usually has. Sonic's confidence is a big part of why he's considered a cool character, and it's something that's been established since his earliest depictions. More than that, I also think it's a pretty essential part of his appeal. Everything about Sonic comes back to it in some way. His cool image, a result of his confidence. All of his beliefs around freedom. Well, Sonic almost always interprets freedom as being related to being your true self and achieving self-actualization. Sonic's confidence is a result of him knowing who he is and accepting himself. His wisecracking, a way of showing how self-assured he is. Almost everything about this character goes back to Sonic being a genuinely confident person. That's who he is. And I think failing to capture that in an adaptation is mischaracterizing him. With all of that said, movie Sonic doesn't start out very confident, does he? It's something he kind of grows into over the course of the first movie, which I think works really well for what the movie was doing. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance here. There are very few things I would say that you can never do with a character without mischaracterizing them. But of course, that doesn't mean that literally everything is on the table. The issue I have with this type of criticism is how often it's used to shut down the discussion in its entirety. Let's get a bit more concrete with my examples here. A very common criticism of the IDW comics is Sonic's merciful streak being completely out of character. To prove this, they'll cite examples of Sonic getting angry or trying to kill Eggman and say that this means that his more merciful stance in the comics is simply out of character. I disagree for two reasons. One, Sonic being a merciful character does have precedence in the text of the Sonic games. And two, I think it's okay for a character to change slightly over time thanks to the demands of certain stories or plot lines. I know some people will object to that, but I seriously think you're being overprotective of Sonic's previous depictions, or, as I'll discuss in a second, grasping at the first thing you can think of to object to a plotline that you don't like. Returning to the point at hand, in IDW Sonic, a big theme is Sonic letting a lot of his alt enemies live in hopes of them redeeming themselves, and if this is the right thing to do. He doesn't kill or imprison Mr. Tinker, and then he lets Metal Sonic go, which leads to the Metal Virus, which almost destroys the world, which leads to Surgeon Kit getting made, and they try to kill him, which leads to, well, nothing of yet, as we've kind of let this plot thread lie after issue 56, honestly. Regardless, the criticism is that Sonic would simply never do this. Why would he ever let Eggman go when Eggman is clearly such a threat to everyone's safety? The real Sonic would never do such a thing. Look at these examples of him being wrathful, or when he trapped a Razor Jin or whatever. Now, it is true that Sonic didn't have a no-kill rule before IDW Sonic. This is a new invention for this storyline, but it's not like this idea comes out of nowhere. There are tons of examples of Sonic extending mercy to his former enemies. As soon as he meets Blaze, he's trying to help her despite her constantly being rude to him and physically attacking him. Same with Knuckles, same with Gimmerl, same with Shadow after he almost destroyed the planet. And yeah, Shadow was being manipulated and all, but like, I don't even know if Sonic knew about that until way later. However, I think the best example of this streak in Sonic's character comes from his first speaking role in a console game. At least I'm pretty sure that's true. Sonic Adventure 1. In the finale, after Chaos has already flooded Station Square and is threatening to destroy the planet, Tikal says that they must seal Chaos in the Master Emerald. But Sonic says no. Watch this scene for me.
My heart has always been in the Master Emerald along with Chaos's. Now he's filled with anger and sadness. And if it goes on, he'll eventually destroy the world like he did before. Look! He's absorbed the Emerald's power. He must be sealed in the Master Emerald now!
How can that help? It won't change how he feels inside, will it? His heart will still remain in turmoil, and his anger just won't vanish. He'll just be trapped forever.
What choice do we have?
I want to point out that the cutscene before this happens shows Station Square like full of people. Chaos has probably just murdered thousands of people on the low end. And yet, the first thing Sonic says when Tikal says they should seal him away is, okay, but like, what about his feelings though? The idea that Sonic would reach out to someone who has done horrendous things and try to redeem them isn't made up for this comic. It's something he's done before and done somewhat consistently at that. It's honestly kind of up to the writer on if Sonic will just glibly kill villains after they annoy him, or if he will go to massive lengths to try and save them if he believes they have good in their heart. And people will try to claim that Sonic is a super consistent character or whatever. I totally buy that Sonic, after seeing so many of his previous enemies turn around and become allies, would start to believe that mercy is superior to wrath. With all of that said, it's not like this entire plotline is completely bulletproof. Sonic does kind of catch the idiot ball in the comic at points to make this plot happen. Letting go of Metal without any supervision is kind of dumb, and they probably should have kept a better eye on Mr. Tinker considering he's, you know, Eggman. But more than anything, it's also just kind of a played out idea for a story. While I will defend some of the decisions made in writing this bit of the comic, I can't say that it's my preferred direction to take Sonic's story. I could go into a lot more detail, but the problem here is that there's a meta element that the characters can't ever get through, which is that they can never kill or meaningfully incapacitate Eggman because he's too important to the franchise's identity. Eggman has to remain active, and that means that Sonic will either choose not to get rid of him or fail to kill him at every turn so that the status quo can remain intact. Knowing that, all of this debate over what the right decision is loses some of its punch. I don't think it completely ruins it, but it does become predictable and tired. And honestly, there's the fact that Sonic is kinda wrong here. The comic itself actually does acknowledge this, but not in a way that actually forces Sonic to change in order to keep the status quo in place. The thing is, Eggman could change for the better in universe. We've seen in places in the comic and through Sage that Eggman isn't heartless. He could become a good person. However, despite that fact, despite Sonic's goals not being completely naive, at least in universe discounting the fact that Eggman can't change for meta reasons, I still think it's wrong to keep him alive. Eggman has been given so many second chances and thrown them all away. It's not merciful to keep giving him chances anymore. It's a testament to Sonic's ego more than anything, and I think the comic kind of gestures at that. Ultimately, what makes this conflict a bit interesting to me is the fact that there is no perfect solution. Eggman has the potential to grow and become a good person, and it's a tragedy to have to take that opportunity away to protect others. But at some point, you do have to put your foot down. It's an interesting idea to talk about in a context where both sides are actually given the time of day they deserve. People online will act as if Sonic has no point, and I think that's wrong. But the brute fact of the matter is that he's not completely correct. But the comic has to side with him for reasons that can't be stated in universe. And that makes this entire plotline extremely frustrating to deal with. I think it's that frustration that makes people get so hung up on this all being out of character. When reading this story, when seeing how bad things get because Sonic tries to be merciful while knowing, as a reader, that his mercy must be in vain, it's hard not to get angry and frustrated with him. And when you get that upset with the comic, it's pretty easy to grab onto the first objection that comes to mind and say that that's why this story sucks. Saying that Sonic would never do this is the easiest objection because they are taking some creative liberties with Sonic's character here. But that doesn't mean that he is actually out of character or that any of the individual pieces of the story are poorly written or whatever else people say. I really do think that the ultimate problem here was that this just wasn't a good choice of theme for the comic, and I would have preferred that they do something different. The final point that I want to go over is the claim that IDW Sonic is a hypocrite. This is one that I see come up a lot, and it's kind of hard to get across the thrust of the argument without just showing you other people's entire videos. Here's the best version of the argument that I can put across. So Sonic's entire philosophy in the comic is about freedom, right? And he wants to give that freedom to everyone, including his enemies. However, despite saying this and saying he'll honor their decisions, Sonic then gets all uppity and says that they shouldn't be evil. Isn't that hypocritical? How can he say he'll respect their decisions and then get mad at the decisions they make? The two main examples people give of this are how Sonic treats Metal Sonic and Surge. He frees Metal Sonic and says that he can do whatever he wants, but then near the end of the Metal Virus arc, when he went back to Eggman and started this whole thing, Sonic yells at Metal Sonic for being a one-note jerk. He also tells Eggman to stop being evil here too, which was a plot point at the time. Similarly with Surge, Sonic tells her to be free while also telling her to stop being such a jerk all the time. So he's telling Surge to do what she wants while also saying that she shouldn't do certain things, which is a contradiction, is it not? So isn't Sonic kind of a hypocrite in these examples? The answer is no for a few reasons. For one, this entire objection is really shaky in terms of philosophy, but also all of these examples miss out on a lot of the context and meaning of these scenes. Let's start with the philosophical objection, because we have to deal with the simple fact that this criticism is philosophically flaccid. What people are talking about here is essentially just a version of the paradox of tolerance. Basically, this whole thing started with people saying, well, You say we should tolerate gay people and non-Christians or whatever, but you won't tolerate our ideas, so you're a hypocrite. The ideas in question being gay people and Muslims are bad or whatever. However, if we think about this for even a second, we can realize that it's impossible to meaningfully tolerate both other religions and types of people, as well as intolerance for those people at the same time, because said intolerance will mean that those people aren't actually being tolerated. So if you care about tolerance, you can't tolerate intolerance. We can substitute in freedom for this same idea. If you give everyone freedom, including the freedom to take away freedom from others, then not everyone will be free. The very easy conclusion to come to here is that people should not have the freedom to take freedom away from others. This pretty much explains all of Sonic's actions in the comic, and in fact, he literally just says this in that big speech that these types of people like to meme on. You know, it's funny that these types like to hit issue 50 with the I ain't reading all that joke, but considering that their objections are literally answered in the text of the comic itself, maybe they should actually consider reading it for once. There's also the fact that all of the instances people point to when making this objection have extra complexities that people just kind of ignore. Let's start with the scene with Metal Sonic, because almost no one who makes this criticism seems to understand the point of the scene. So remember how Sonic sparing Mr. Tinker and letting Metal Sonic go is kind of what allowed the Metal Virus to happen? Well, this decision is a huge deal for basically the entire first half of this comic's run. Both SBO and Shadow, who are initially against sparing Mr. Tinker, give Sonic crap about it later on in the arc, and we see how all of this affects Sonic. Remember earlier when we talked about that panel of Sonic freaking out, wondering if what he did was right or not? Sonic's guilt about his decision to spare Mr. Tinker is important context for that panel. Sonic throughout the entire Metal Virus arc is both emotionally and physically worn down. He has to run for 2 weeks without meaningful rest to make sure he doesn't turn. But worse, their situation keeps getting more and more dire. It already starts off with the implication that this is, at some level, Sonic's fault hanging over him the entire time. Then there are Shadow and SBO calling him out on his short-sightedness, and then Sonic has to watch as more and more of the planet falls into ruin, as more and more of his friends fall to the virus he caused. Sonic is guilty, he feels tired, and maybe just a little bit desperate. So he does what a lot of people would do in this kind of situation. He deflects. The entire argument here isn't about Metal Sonic. Not really. It's about Sonic's guilt, and Eggman recognizes that pretty quickly. That's why he turns things around on Sonic, why he jabs accusations at him. That's the thing that's so annoying about this criticism, because you're supposed to see Sonic's behavior and how he's changed his tune so drastically, how unlike himself he's acting here, and that's supposed to make you think about what Sonic's feeling and what exactly is happening here. The comic is inviting the audience to question Sonic's decisions, to ask if his way of looking at things is actually as just as he says it is. Well, I do understand not liking this thematic throughline and criticizing it. If you want to criticize how the comic handles this theme, you have to actually engage with what the comic is saying. This gets even worse when we move forward to talk about Sonic and Surge, because this is where the comic is most critical of Sonic's actions. But before we can talk about all that, we need to go over a lot of little things that the comic sets up over the course of its run. A really important moment thematically is in issue 14, where Starline successfully tricks Silver and Sonic, and it looks like he may have killed them with his ploy. This leads Eggman to absolutely blow up on him, saying that just killing Sonic isn't the point. He could do that any day. The point is to prove that he's superior, to beat him. This idea is so fascinating because it mirrors Sonic's outlook. Sonic could also theoretically kill Eggman or take him out for good some way, but he doesn't, because that goes against his moral code. If Sonic killed Eggman, he would be crossing a line that he doesn't want to, and more importantly, he'd have to admit that his current way of looking at the world was wrong, at least to some extent. This is a very important parallel between Sonic and Eggman. The battle between these two characters isn't actually a physical battle, but a philosophical one. They're trying to prove to each other which one of them is right about how the world works. What's more important, freedom or glory? Both Sonic and Eggman are too proud to give up on their ideals and change, and that leads to what the comic dubs the Sonic cycle. This is another running idea that the comic introduces, and it's the main motivation for Starline creating Surgeon Kit. Because neither Sonic nor Eggman can bring themselves to end this little charade of theirs, they get stuck in a cycle of constant battles. Eggman comes up with a scheme, Sonic stops him, neither change their outlook on life, and you rinse and repeat ad nauseum. Starline has his own views of things, so he tries to change things by introducing Surgeon Kit. But in terms of the actual narrative, Surgeon Kit serve a very different and very important purpose. They show that this little Sonic cycle that Sonic and Eggman have fallen into and that everyone just accepts has consequences. Consequences that Sonic is kind of okay with, even if you wouldn't say that. This is also really important for understanding Surgeon Kit's characters throughout this section of the comic. Surgeon Kit are just the manifestation of Sonic's failures up to this point in the run. As far as they can tell, they only exist because of Sonic's actions. They had everything stolen from them because of his stupid beliefs about mercy and forgiveness. And all they know as a result is suffering. Sonic refused to stop Eggman or Starline. He kept letting them complete all their plans and only stopped them after the fact. The result of that approach is that Starline got to create Surgeon Kit, got to steal their lives away and do God knows what to make them into what they are today. One of my favorite little details about Surgeon Kit is that they have a healing factor that functions through a modified version of the metal virus, which their bodies are composed of. So their bodies are literally made of Sonic's past mistakes. All of this symbolism kind of gets wrapped up in some of the more specific details of their backstory, the allusions to child abuse and trauma and all that. But that's also really important here because at the end of the day, what Surgeon Kit need isn't revenge. Their plans won't make them happy because Sonic and Tails and Eggman being alive isn't what's hurting them. What's hurting them is the trauma of all the bullshit they went through. And what they need to heal is forgiveness and mercy and all that stuff that Sonic is preaching. But that is where the catch-22 comes in, because in Surge's mind, accepting that forgiveness would be accepting Sonic's worldview. The worldview that, in some ways, caused all of this in the first place. For Surge, taking Sonic's help is tantamount to saying that all of the stuff she and Kit went through is okay, that it was acceptable. That's why we get this huge blow up in issue 56. That's why she says that there is no freedom for her as long as Sonic is alive. Because as long as he is, the cycle that created her, that stole her life away from her and left her with nothing, is still going on. All of this culminates in the end of issue 56 with this speech from Kitsunami, where he kind of just lays all of this out in the open. He says, basically directly to the audience, that Sonic and Eggman are the same. They don't need Surgeon Kit. They don't care about them the way that Surgeon Kit care about each other. They want them, want to use them to prove that they're the ones in the right. And this is why the accusation that Sonic is a hypocrite in IDW is so annoying to me. Because that is like the entire point. The entire point of the first 56 issues of IDW Sonic is this parallel between Sonic and Eggman, pointing out how Sonic refusing to let go of his worldview and doing things his own way can hurt those around him, and how he's grown numb to that. Unfortunately, after this giant emotional fight between Sonic, Eggman, and Surge, this idea kind of gets dropped because they can't actually have Sonic decide that murder is okay in this children's comic, which is understandable. But like, if you weren't actually going to give Sonic a full character arc here, maybe don't spend several years building up all of this thematic stuff around his flaws and how they've hurt other people. This is why I say I really wish the comic had focused on something else for most of its run, because as great as a lot of this is, it sucks to know that the final push will never come. I really, really wish we could see Sonic admit that he was wrong in some way and that his pride did put people in danger, but it's pretty clear that we won't ever get that moment, and I fear that such a thing may literally not be allowed by Sega. Mainly, I just wish that the criticism of this comic and its ideas actually acknowledge what the comic is saying and how it said it. With all of that covered, is there anything left to talk about? Is that all there is to say? IDW was actually good, and the people who don't like it are just insane whiners? Well, no, I do think there is something more important to talk about than these little details. And that's why this backlash even exists. It's easy to say that I'm just a big brain genius and all the people who disagree with me are just stupid, and that's why they don't enjoy the comic as much as I do. But on top of that being quite mean, it's also just probably not true. I think there is a reason why many reacted so negatively to this interpretation of Sonic, and it's a very simple problem. Sonic, as a character, started his life by having many different interpretations running around. You have the old Sonic cartoons, the comics, and things like Sonic X and the games all being made in different regions for different audiences. And that's given us a few takes on Sonic across the world. I do feel as if these differences are often exaggerated, but it's not like they aren't there at all. And the consequences of these different interpretations of Sonic's character is that people will like or dislike those interpretations more or less than others. This is maybe a bit of a diatribe, but in my experience, there are two types of Sonic stories. One's where Sonic is the main character, and one where he's merely the point of view for us to watch someone else's story. That may sound kind of strange, but in games like Sonic Rush or Sonic and the Black Knight, most of the emotional storytelling is not done through Sonic, but through the characters he interacts with. Sonic doesn't need to grow or change in these stories because he's already a fully realized person, and that allows him to help others realize who they are. That's what some people want out of their Sonic stories. They don't like Sonic being a flawed character. They don't want him to be the protagonist of the story in a traditional sense. They want him to be a guide for other characters along their journeys, and that's a totally fine way to write the character. But it's also not the only type of story we've gotten from this franchise, and it's not what a lot of other fans want from Sonic. I think the schism in what people want from Sonic stories kind of maps onto some other discussions in the fandom, to be perfectly honest. And this schism is a bit of an issue, because it means that Sonic stories have a really hard time appeasing both sides of the fan base at once. I can totally empathize with what those in the other camp feel on this one. If tomorrow it turned out that IDW Sonic was getting shut down and they were going in a new direction with all of the stories in the franchise, and that direction leaned into Sonic being a flat character again, I'd be really disappointed. I mean, hell, if IDW didn't go in the direction it did with its storytelling, I may have never started my channel to begin with. My interest in the Sonic franchise being renewed happened in large part thanks to the Metal Virus saga and how it handled Sonic as a character. And if that had never happened, I don't even think this channel would, exist. IDW Sonic is what made me love this franchise again. What made me remember why I love these games so much as a kid. For better and for worse, IDW Sonic is my Sonic. But I know that for a lot of people, their Sonic is Archie Sonic, or SA1 and 2 Sonic, or Sonic X Sonic, or maybe the CD OVA Sonic, or maybe even movie Sonic. And the way they see the character is different to me. And it sucks to have something you care about so much and see it replaced with something that's just not quite the same. It's happened a lot in this franchise, sure, but that doesn't mean that people don't have the right to be frustrated about it. I totally understand where the frustration with IDW Sonic is coming from, but I don't think that that means that the comic itself is bad. And I don't think the people in this camp are being particularly productive with their frustration. I love talking about art and about Sonic. I love adding to the conversation around these stories and games. And I feel as if the way that this camp has approached IDW Sonic has quashed discussion rather than fostered it. And that's the thing that I take issue with. Like I said at the outset of this video, you don't have to like these comics. You don't have to like these stories or these interpretations of the characters. But I hope at the very least that this video can lead to better discussions around the comic and what its flaws actually are. And that's the video. Before we go, quick shout out to all of my members: Elric111, Agent B7, Joseph Florian, Shredding Pixels, GB484, Altria Gaming, and Nicholas Goslin.